Welcome to Socially Unacceptable, from F***ups to Fame, the marketing podcast that celebrates the professional mishaps, mistakes and misjudgments while delivering valuable marketing and life lessons in the time it takes you to eat your lunch.
So our very first office, we actually had an ambulance as our boardroom. It was a real ambulance that we bought from...
As you do.
Just ask the client, what's the business problem? And he said, I used to give this training, and he said 9 out of 10 agencies go, oh, we can't ask them what the business problem is. Like, because this is the brief, we meet the brief, we do the work, let's agree, and that, oh no, ask the question, why are we doing this? What's the problem? And he said, if you do that, you'll stand out, you'll stand out.
Otherwise you're purely responding on a superficial basis.
Yeah, because his point was, the brief usually isn't the brief. You wanted to talk about when you opened an office for Frank in New York. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Andrew?
I didn't want to talk about it. You asked me what my up.
I'm your host, Chris Norton, and I've worked in PR and marketing for more than 25 years. 13 years ago, Will and I founded Prohibition PR, as we wanted to do PR differently, using customer insight at our very core. Today, I'm proud to say we have an amazing team, and Prohibition is one of the North's top 10 PR and social media agencies. We turn over more than 7 figures every single year. Do you work with, or for, a marketing agency of some kind? Do you think you're getting the most you can from them? Do you feel like they fully understand your business and you understand theirs properly? In today's show, we meet Andrew Bloch, a former international agency owner and all-round pitch genius. Andrew founded FrankPR back in 2000, and he built it up into an international agency before selling it a number of years later. Andrew now works in mergers and acquisitions in the agency space and even helps big brands find the right agency for their creative briefs. Essentially, he's a marketing matchmaker. I think you're going to enjoy this episode because this week we're going to break down how to get the most value from your relationship with your agencies and how to get a win-win from that relationship. Andrew also has some hilarious pitch anecdotes, which I think you're going to like. So, as always, sit back, relax, and let's hear how you can get the most from your agency. Hi everybody, welcome back to Socially Unacceptable. Today we are joined on the show by William Ockenden, obviously, as always, and also Andrew Bloch from Andrew Bloch and Associates, and from Frank fame. Good morning, Andrew. How's it going?
Good morning. Yeah, it's going really well, thank you. How about you?
Yeah, good. It's good to have you on. So, obviously, we know you from when you set up Frank back in the day, FrankPR, which is how many years ago? Year 2000, wasn't it?
Yeah, so, this 24th year.
24th year. Yeah. And so you've set up Andrew Bloch and Associates. Why don't you tell us a bit about what you're doing now with yourself then?
Yeah, sure. So I stepped back from Frank after 20 years, decided to go in my own direction. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do, which was run another agency. I wanted to do my own thing. And now I have what I think the fashionable term is a portfolio career. So I've split my time in various different directions. I spend a lot of my time doing mergers and acquisitions work, working for a company called PCB, where I'm a partner in their marketing services team. And that's about buying and selling agencies, PR, marketing, digital, data, for the big management consultancies, the big marketing services groups, as well as sort of mid-size and smaller independents that are making acquisitions, also helping sell companies that feel like it's the right time for an exit. I think my official title is, I can't even remember, but I look after PR, digital, social, influencer and content for the AAR. So the AAR, for anyone that doesn't know, is, I guess the easiest way to explain it, it's a management consultancy that specialises in marketing services. So it helps brand owners find the right partners, helps them sort out their organisations and the balance of sort of internal and external resource. So a lot of my time is running processes to help them find the right agencies. I continue to look after the PR for Lord Sugar and all of the Apprentice winners, which is something that I've done for 22, 23 years, not fired yet. And then I sit on the board of several different companies, mainly in the marketing services arena, helping them with growth, how to achieve success, how to build the company. And when I'm not doing that, I take a day off.
Andrew, I mean, wow, how busy are you? Dealing with Lord Sugar on the end of a phone, holy shit. Like, I've had some difficult questions, but when I used to watch The Apprentice, it used to give me anxiety, wasn't it? Of just like, oh my God, I'm so glad my clients aren't as bad as that. What is it like dealing with Lord Sugar? Does he put you through the boardroom properly, or is he all right because he trusts you after that many years?
He's all right, yeah. I mean, I think what you see on the show, I mean, that is him. It's a bit of a caricature, but it's not anything that isn't part of his personality. I guess what you don't see is the softer side of him, his sense of humour, his kind of loyalty to his staff, that side of things. But yeah, he's pretty direct, and we communicate, oh God, I mean, dozens of times a day over whatever form of media it might be, email, WhatsApp, phone calls. And he's very straight, he's very to the point. But we've got used to each other's working styles. And I think we're quite complementary. I mean, he's ruthlessly efficient. I like to think that I am too. So, you know, I'm always quick to be able to respond to him and sort stuff out. And yeah, we get on very well.
Well, that's good. I mean, I do get the feeling he's quite loyal. So now you're dealing with... You've moved out of agency. You're now helping facilitate. I love the way you described that. But the purchase, the mergers and acquisitions for agencies, which obviously as an agency owner I'm fascinated in, because the markets you're moving in there is interesting. But from your experience, what are the biggest roadblocks brands faced in getting most out of their agency relationships? What's holding people back, like from clients? What don't they do right to get the most from their agencies?
I mean, it's interesting when you know, look, I spent years and years agency side and then now sort of flipping to the other side of the table, really. What I generally see, it's normally 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And it's very basic stuff, but it's the stuff that you can easily overlook. And I think it's really about, you know, the best relationships, and it's a real cliche, but they're partnerships. So the client doesn't see the agency as a supplier. They see them as a trusted partner. And for an agency, you know, I think they need to be involved. They need to understand the business in a broader remit than just necessarily the PR or the social media or the performance marketing or whichever area they're looking after. They need to understand what the client's business objectives are. And I see far too many agencies are just wrapped up in the day-to-day without actually sort of stepping back and looking at it. I think the other thing that I notice on the client side is they're busy. It's obvious, but it's not their sole job, their sole responsibility just to be there for an agency. And an agency needs to understand that and be respectful of that. But the best clients invest time in their agencies and they make sure that they understand their business, the culture, and of course sort of setting it up from the beginning is normally the biggest indication of whether a relationship's going to be successful or not. And for me, that's about having really clear scopes of work, agreeing the remit of an agency, being respectful to them if they sort of go above and beyond that scope continually and it's not working commercially for them. So, you know, there's lots of ways to make these relationships work. But often agencies and clients can become complacent about their relationship. Things can kind of die down a little bit once the honeymoon period's over. And you have to consistently put effort in, consistently step back and evaluate what's working and what's not. And I think it's about being honest with one another and setting yourself up with a relationship where you can talk to each other when not everything's going to go right the whole time. Things don't work. You do make mistakes. Things go wrong. And having a relationship with a client whereby you understand one another and you don't fudge things over and try and sort of bluff it if it's not going well, that's going to lead, you know, it's no different to a personal relationship. Communication is the key to these things. But the best clients are the ones that respect their agencies, treat them like partners, invest in the relationship, and then that's reciprocated from the other side.
So presumably that almost starts from the very initial onboarding process, does it? You know, when you have that initial meeting, you kind of you get to meet as the agency, the wider team with the client. I mean, from your perspective, you know, how can clients and agencies have an effective onboarding? Because I've seen so many times that process go completely wrong, and from the off, expectations are completely out of whack, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right, and it is an expectation thing. I think, you know, what I always try to explain to a client, especially when it's a big budget, you know, I run pitches sort of $1 million, $2 million plus in fees, and you know that requires a big resource from the agency, and you know, clients don't always realise agencies, or certainly not well-run agencies, they're not sitting around with that level of capacity. They're going to have to get up to speed. They're going to have to onboard. They're going to probably have to hire. Going to have to take people off certain accounts and shuffle things up. You know, that isn't an overnight process. So that's the first thing. Clients need to understand there needs to be this sort of run-in period. Where it works really well is as you alluded to, these kind of inductions where the teams can come into the client's offices, meet the team. If they're, you know, a retail operation, go and visit their retail outlets. I often think it works really well when an agency places someone within the client's organisation for a day a week or something like that, certainly in the run-up, and vice versa. Allowing clients to work from your space works really well. And probably one of the most effective things you can do from the outset is work with your client and your agency together to set like a 100-day plan of this is what we're going to aim to achieve by 100 days. So by the end of that 100 days, we're going to be up and running and at full capacity, the best you're ever going to see us. But there is this sort of 2-3 months of running as we build the team, as we learn, as we understand each other's organisations. And that way you're managing expectations from the outset. No one's disappointed. It's all about expectation management. But yeah, you need to set yourself up from day one.
Well, this show is all about fuck-ups, Andrew. And obviously, you've been involved in a lot of pitches. I've heard you speak about pitch situations. So what's the biggest fuck-up you've made in a pitch? Because trust me, I've made a few.
I've made a lot. I've probably chosen to sort of throw them out the window. I mean, look, essentially any pitch you don't win is a fuck-up. But sometimes you can put in your best effort and you get beaten by someone better, or culturally you weren't the right fit. I think, you know, where I've had disastrous pitches is really where we have probably not been prepared well enough and we've winged it a little bit. Or where, I mean, I'm always a fan of like a combination of style and substance. So you have to have the substance. You can't just sort of bring on the flair and charisma without anything behind it. But I always felt, you know, you want to do that thing to be memorable. When a client's seeing 4 or 5 agencies, you want them to remember you. And actually, from the very early days of Frank, with that in mind, we decided we'd always have memorable boardrooms. Because, you know, you go into a meeting room and it's the same as another one, same as another one. So our very first office, we actually had an ambulance as our boardroom. It was a real ambulance that we bought from
As you do.
the Caledonian Road, stripped out, spray painted, boardroom table inside. That was good, but it was quite small. And I remember our first big pitch, sort of a year into the agency, and suddenly like 15 clients turned up, and it was a disaster. We obviously didn't have aircon or anything. There we had this little rubbish sort of fan that didn't do anything, and there was like 15 people squashed in the back of an ambulance that, well, it wasn't designed for that in the first place, but it certainly wasn't designed to hold that amount of people. And then when we moved offices, the next boardroom was a beach, and the thinking behind that was, you know, you're most relaxed when you're on a beach on holiday with the sand between your toes, and that's where you're most creative, when you're sort of switched off.
Was there actual sand on the floor then?
Actual sand, yeah. I mean, I'd love to say we shipped it in from the Maldives. I think it was from a builder's yard at Wicks or something. It's like industrial sand. But Graham and I, as guys, hadn't really thought through the fact that women don't really want to take their shoes off. And, you know, as I said, this wasn't like that sort of beautiful white sand. This was a bit sort of yellow and
toxic builder's
within
sand.
about a month. It had pen lids in it, staples, you know, all sorts of things you'd find in sand. Yeah. That was And then we sort of moved on. The next one was a bedroom. And again, it was about this feeling of relaxation, massive room, beds. And that was fine, actually. No major issues with that. There's a few stories that aren't suitable for this podcast that I could tell you about what went on in that room. For another day, for a beer. The last sort of one that we built, it was like a fairground with waltzers. So you got into these waltzers and they actually spun round. They were proper fairground waltzers. And yeah, we did have a client who was a bit on the large side and didn't fit into the waltzer. And I think that was a pitch loss before we'd even opened our mouths. So that's all about the environment and being memorable. And, no one's going to forget you were the agency with the waltzer, you were the agency with the bedroom, with the sound, with the ambulance. And that always really worked for us. It's about being memorable. But in terms of the actual pitches, I remember even pre-Frank, there was a pitch where it was actually my boss at the time. And she was so nervous, she physically vomited on the table, which wasn't a good look.
How do you recover from that?
That's memorable, though, Andrew.
Yeah, that was memorable. It was memorable for all the wrong reasons. They normally are for the wrong reasons. We did one for a computer game client, and it was a war game we were pitching for. I can't actually remember what the game was, but we thought it'd be good pitch theatre to waterboard someone live in the pitch. And that didn't go down particularly well. We didn't do a dress rehearsal, and we didn't kill an employee. That would have been really memorable. But we did probably cause him more suffering than we were intending to do with our pitch theatre. And I don't think any of us would forget that. And we lost that pitch.
That was going above and beyond. That's going above and beyond a bit of torture.
That's probably lifelong PTSD, isn't it, for that particular account exec who got waterboarded?
Yeah, I'm not particularly proud of that one. But we've done some crazy stuff. We bought an actor. I think it was for I Can't Believe It's Not Butter. And the whole campaign was about PRing. I can't really remember. They used lookalikes in their ads. So there was like an Ozzy Osbourne lookalike. And so we thought for the pitch, which was all about how you're going to make this ad famous, we would put a fake PR person in the room. And then they were an actor and they'd start getting increasingly weird and eccentric throughout the pitch. And then at the end, we'd reveal, I can't believe I'm not actually a PR. But they ended up being quite good, and the client really liked them and wanted them to be on the account. So that was a strange one. I'm not sure what that said about the rest of the community. So I've done loads. I've probably pitched, I wouldn't even want to count, but it's definitely got to be in the thousands in terms of pitches I've done. So there's been plenty of good ones, plenty of bad ones. And I think, one of the things about working in this industry, you do become quite resilient. So you brush off a pitch win or a pitch loss relatively quickly and just move on to the next one. But sometimes it's a bit like football teams where they just seem to lose. No matter what they do, they go on a losing streak. And I remember a couple of streaks where we were losing 5-6 in a row, and that's tough. And also winning streaks where we just, we didn't deserve to win. We'd turn up unprepared, wasn't even that good, but we had such confidence in our own ability, and we were on this roll that we just seemed to be untouchable. And unfortunately that came to an end. These things always do. But pitching is, to me, it's like the lifeblood of our industry. And for any agency, it doesn't matter what the discipline is, it's so exciting. You learn so much, but you have to have a fairly run process. That a pitch is great, whether you win or lose, if it's a fairly run process and it's proportionate to the size of the prize. But when it's not, it's a really shitty feeling, and you've wasted your time. Everyone's wasted their time. So, one of the things I've tried to do since joining the AAR is ensure the processes are fair. And part of that is having a process that is proportionate to the size of the prize. So, fair enough if it's a £2 million bit of business, you want to be quite rigorous in terms of checking out an agency's capabilities. But if it's for a 50 grand project, a 20 grand project, and it's tactical and just a bit of creative, something like that, you shouldn't be putting an agency through the same process. And it's a big investment for an agency in terms of time and resource financially. So it always has to be proportionate. So I see myself now, although I've gone to the other side, I want to use my experience of great pitching to be able to benefit clients, but also be the friend of agencies. And, that goes all the way through to if someone doesn't win, making sure that you're not sending them a one-line email saying you came a close second. You've got to give them feedback and, at the very least they can learn something from the process and realise where they went wrong or where another agency was better. That's really important to me. And I'd like to think every pitch I've run, in the last few years has been a decent one.
In terms of running pitches then, we got you on the show because you're from an agency background, and obviously now you've moved to the finding the right partner. That's what your job is now. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So with that in mind then, what are the key elements of a highly effective agency brief? How do brand marketing, people in brand, how do they get the most into a brief without it being overbearing?
The simple answer to that is the ask has to be very clear. And I think it's almost the easy thing to do for a client, just to sort of throw every bit of information they can get at an agency in the hope that they're going to grasp something. A good brief is, first of all, helping an agency understand what you're looking for and getting to know them and them being able to get to know you a bit, even before you've sort of sent them a written brief or given them a verbal brief. And then the actual ask has to sort of form a scope of work so it's clear. The ask has to be, as I was just saying previously, proportionate to the reward at the end. So, if it's, let's just say a creative stunt around Christmas, don't start asking them for 1 year's worth of strategy. Don't start asking them for these deep insights into their brand, the market. Just think about what the ask is and what you want from the agency, and then make the brief proportionate to that. And the clearer, the better. Show them what success looks like for you as a client. So, if that is business metrics, amount of orders, amount of hits to a website, volume of sales, share of voice, tell them that. Show them where you're at the moment. Explain to them, normally a pitch process is a distress purchase in the, if they were happy, they wouldn't really be changing. So tell them what you're not happy with at the time being, and be respectful of agencies. Clients don't always understand the amount of preparation, the time it takes. Don't give an agency, a brief on Christmas Eve and ask for a response on New Year's Day. Those kind of things. The more respectful and the more you invest in the agencies you're briefing, the better responses you're going to get. And that comes down to also sort of selecting the right amount of agencies to pitch for something. And, you do hear these horror stories of 10 agencies pitching, and it's not fair. It's not right. You're wasting everyone's time. So, when I'm sitting with a client, I will always encourage them no more than 4 agencies, sometimes 3. You can do a process in advance to narrow that list down. And I think if the ask isn't great in the beginning, you can start with a much broader list whilst you figure out what type of agency, what size of agency, what skill set, what culture you're looking for, and then narrow it down, give them the right amount of time, have check-ins along the way, don't just sort of send them something and go silent. And clients aren't being difficult when they're not giving you that sort of interaction. It's just they're busy and they don't necessarily understand the value of the more that they put in, the more that they're going to get out of the response. And again, the best process is not necessarily a pitch process. I think a pitch process is quite artificial. You don't always see the team that's going to work on your business. It's a performance. There are people who are very good at pitching that win disproportionate amounts of work, but when it comes to the work, not so good. So there's lots of other ways that you can do it. I'm a big fan of sort of more workshop type methodology, or even live briefs where you brief an agency in the room, you see how they react. When I'm working on big social pitches, that's a great way of seeing how an agency thinks on their feet, how good they are reactively to the news agenda, and also it gives you an insight strategically about whether they understand these are the areas that we should touch. These are the areas to avoid. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. I think it's a bit of a default to go to a pitch. And some, there is a time and a place for a pitch, but it's not in every instance. But the best clients are the ones that will invest in that process. And, time and time again, I see it. They get the best at the other end.
So it was interesting to hear you talk about ridiculous timeframes, Andrew, when it comes to pitching. And I think that's something we've all had. We also get frustrated by clients refusing to disclose budgets when it comes to a pitch. What other kind of, common mistakes do you see that clients could address and write better pitches as a result?
I think I've probably covered most of them. There's also a role, it's not just the client's responsibility. The agency needs to be responsible for making sure they ask the right questions. And, I've always trained agencies in terms of how to do that. And actually budget is a key one, because I think there's this sort of client mentality. Well, if I tell them I've got 100 grand to spend, they're going to spend 100 grand. It's not all, maybe, but if you don't tell someone the budget, then how can they give you an appropriate response? It's like saying, I want a car. Well, what do you want? Do you want a Mini? Do you want a Rolls Royce? If you don't give someone a budget, how they supposed to know? So you need to be able to ask the right questions and explain to clients why that's important. And if a client is really, really reluctant to give a budget, I'd often sort of say, well, what if we were to respond across 3 levels? So, bronze level is 50 grand, silver level is 100 grand, gold is 500 grand. And then that will encourage them to say, well, yeah, but actually the gold won't be as much as that. Or, we'd definitely spend at least X. There's ways of getting the budget from a client. I think the other thing that clients don't do is invest the time with the teams. And, for me, that sort of chemistry stage is critical. Going into agencies, seeing them in their own environment, meeting the teams that are going to work on the business. Telling an agency really what you want. An agency is always going to put their best people onto a pitch, and they might bring in some other people. But if the MD is not going to work on the business, you don't want to see them. Like, what difference does it make? Meet them for a coffee, get an idea how involved they are in client business. But if they're not going to be active, so that's, clients need to ensure that. I think there's lots of soft factors. The chemistry is not always as black and white as you might think. And then, the other area is the commercials and understanding what they're buying. So if an agency works on a timesheet basis, understand where those hours go in advance. Understand what the balance of the teams are, how much senior time you're getting. I think I'll always encourage clients to talk to agencies about what's your average client retention, what's your average staff retention. Those sorts of things tell you a lot about the culture of an agency and how likely they are to have team stability, which is often a big client agency issue. So there's lots of things that you can ask and find out, but I'll always go back to the fact you get your timings right in terms of these asks. Don't ask too much up front. One of the things I've encouraged clients to do is not ask for sort of tailored creds from 50 agencies at the start of their process. That's when they work with an intermediary like AAR, we can advise them and guide them without needing to ask too much of agencies' time. Your agency website is super important. I never really realised that when I was running an agency. I knew it was significant, but the amount of research that is done on your agency without you even realising it is immense. The amount of times you're ruled out of a pitch because of what a client's seen on your website and you don't even know about it is much, much higher than I ever. You're laughing. Is that
that's
fascinating,
isn't it?
The fact that people are just writing you off when they see your website and just saying they're no good.
Yeah, they do. They just look at a website and they just they might get good sense or a bad sense, but it has to signpost what you're all about, what you do, what are your services, give them a sense of the agency, and clients can be turned off and turned on by a website. It's more important than you perhaps think it is.
So this show's all about fuck-ups, as we've said. It's called From Fuck-Ups to Fame, and you've given me a few things in your responses to the questionnaire. We asked you a few questions, and you wanted to talk about when you opened an office for Frank in New York. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Andrew?
I didn't want to talk about it. You asked me what my fuck-ups. No, I think, look, I mean, people always say you've got to kind of fail to learn, and if you learn, it's not a failure. And to an extent, that's true. But I think anyone who's running an agency, you don't really want to fail. You want to get it right every time. And I think, I was very blessed with Frank. We had, not an easy journey, but it seemed to be that everything we did worked. And we'd had sort of our London office, which was going great, and we'd opened up in Manchester, we'd opened up in Glasgow, we'd opened up in Sydney. We were always of the view, like, it's sort of easier to open in an office where they speak the same language as you. Culturally, it will be more similar. Just felt like an easy thing to do. America was the dream, big market. But there'd been so many failures in America, so many great ad agencies, PR agencies. There was that quote, I have no idea who said it, but the streets of Madison Avenue are littered with dead agencies. And it wasn't cockiness that we thought would be different, but we had a self-belief, and Frank was flying, and we thought, yeah, let's give it a go. We found an MD. Actually, the MD was quite interesting. He did Donald Trump's PR for the Apprentice. So it was, I got on very well with him. Sadly, he died, not whilst at Frank's a few years ago, but he was a lovely guy. We put a lot of effort into it. I used to go out for a week every single month. And I don't know, we were achieving what I would call moderate success. The agency was running, it was profitable, just, but it was having a really detrimental effect on the rest of the business. And I personally found it really hard to focus on those two things at once. And the London office, which was our biggest office by a long way, was beginning to suffer. And with one client, I think I didn't realise the scale you need in America. And part of the reason we set up there was because we had clients that were American clients or international clients, people like Disney, and we were looking after hotels.com at the time and stuff like that. They all had operations in America, and they all liked us. We were smashing it for them in terms of the work we were doing in the UK or elsewhere. I didn't realise that, I think it was hotels.com when they started talking to us about, okay, we would consider using Frank. And so I'm like, well, who are you working with at the moment? Oh, we're working with a small boutique agency out there. Okay, what's your team structure look like? Oh, we've got 35 people work on our account. What? Yeah. The team's 35 people. And it wasn't impossible for us to scale to that level, but when you have a big account there, it's a big account. So we were winning kind of like boutique-y small clients, and I was spending way too much time. The culture there is very different. You could email anyone at any level and they would meet you for a coffee. I couldn't believe my luck. I was like, I'm going to be in New York next week. Do you fancy meeting up for a coffee to the CEO of this, the marketing director of that? Yeah, sure. And you'd meet them and they'd be full of enthusiasm. Every American knows how to speak, how to conduct themselves. And I'd leave the meeting, I'd phone Graham back in London. Oh my God, I just met the marketing director. Like, I'll be amazed if we don't have their business in a week. And he's like, wow, this is incredible. And I don't think I'm a relatively good judge of character. We all get it wrong sometimes, but I have quite a good instinct for. And then they'd ghost you, or they'd sort of give you some sort of bluster, like it was the best meeting of my life. I was so inspired by you. I'm like, yep, well, when can we start? And then things didn't happen. And the staff were amazing at presenting, and when we went out to interview for people, everyone that came in, it was so different to UK culture. They'd researched you, they knew everything about you, they'd sent you an email in advance telling you all about your career and what they were looking forward to talking to you about. You'd meet them, they'd talk like they were A-list Hollywood actors. You'd finish the meeting, they'd send you a summary of what they learned, what they liked, why they're excited.
Wow.
We were like, who do we choose? They're all brilliant.
I like this.
And then someone said to me, you could go into Starbucks, take the barista from behind the counter who doesn't even know what PR is, and they would interview better than someone from anywhere else in the world. And it's so true. So there was all these like cultural nuances that it was, same language, but entirely different in terms of their approach. Plus the Frank style was quite disruptive and challenging and didn't really resonate with the US market, where PR was a lot safer, I would say. And we were sort of moving along, and I was pitching, and we'd win little things. And as I said, it wasn't a disaster because we weren't loss-making. We were making a sort of moderate amount of profit, but things were suffering. And we made the decision to shut it down. And it was, we felt like we were a little bit at the casino, sort of kept putting chips on, hoping that we're going to get the big win, and that the wins just didn't come, and we were just going, you have to know when to stop. And that was really tough for me. I think it was my first experience of failure at Frank, and I can dress it up and say it wasn't a failure because it was and it wasn't. It depends what way you look at it.
Yeah.
But if I'm being honest with myself, of course it was a failure, because otherwise I'd have hugely successful US operation, and I don't. So it was a failure. But I was also, as tough as it was, quite proud that we made that decision. It was a strong decision to know when to throw the towel in, because otherwise I think we would have had real problems. But that was tough. That was probably, is it a fuck up? Yeah, I guess so. Certainly one of the toughest things I've had to deal with.
I don't think that was a fuck up though. You did all right. I mean, you made a profit. It was a successful business. You just decided to focus on the UK, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe more a failing than a fuck up. I'd like to think in my career I haven't majorly fucked up anything, and I don't mean that in an arrogant way. It's, the thing about earned media and earned communication is it's earned. So there's no guarantees. If you're not putting spend behind something, it's not guaranteed. But you have a gut instinct of what's going to work and what's not, which is based on your experience. And, we used to pitch some pretty out there ideas, and they were bold, and a client, would say, is it going to work? And I used to say, well, I can't promise you, but everything in my being tells me this is going to be good. I guess what I can't guarantee is how good it's going to be, because there's an element of fortune, an element of luck that comes into it. And sometimes you have great ideas that just, for whatever reason, just don't fulfill their potential. But I've never pitched anything half-heartedly, or that I kind of thought I'll tell the client it will work and I'll worry about it later. We had Frank above the door. That was a license to be open and honest. And that, to be fair, was my personality. That's who I am. I'm open, I'm honest, I'm not. So, did we have things that didn't work as well as I'd have liked or I'd have hoped? Yeah, sure. But did we fuck up? No, I don't think we ever had a complete disaster. I mean, it's always the fear of every publicist that they're doing a big launch announcement or a stunt and no one turns up, no one writes about it. It's horrible. I mean, it was in the olden days of PR, and when I say olden days, I'm talking sort of mid-90s, it was kind of different. You used to do these big photo calls, and they were quite extravagant and expensive, and then you'd invite the world's media and the photographers to come, and until they came, you didn't know if it was going to be a success or not. And it was always my fear that, you're stood there with a celebrity holding a bottle of ketchup or whatever rubbish it was that they were promoting and no one would turn up. And it only actually happened once, and it wasn't my campaign. I was very junior, I was assisting. And I don't actually remember what the client was, but I remember that the photo was two sumo wrestlers, one with Union Jack, sort of sumo, I don't know what you call their trout, their sort of pants, padding, and one American. And it was in the middle of Covent Garden, and it was the most bizarre thing because there was these 30-stone sumos in these branded padded pants, and no one turned up. And I remember the account director or whoever it was that was in charge, visibly wiped, frantically phoning people to kind of turn up and see where they are. I think in those days there wasn't even mobile phones, so they were going to a phone box and phoning the office and where is everyone? And I remember it wasn't my responsibility. I was just there, I don't know, helping the sumos or whatever I was supposed to be doing. And I was like, I never want this to happen to me like that. I never want to be in that situation. But it happens, we're PR people, but the best PR people they know. And then, even if you kind of have the instinct it's going to work, you have the experience to set up things in advance, negotiate exclusives, get some sort of pre-publicity. So even in the worst case scenario that on the day something goes wrong, you've banked some stuff already. That's experience. But I loved and still do love to make clients feel comfortably uncomfortable. I hate doing boring work. It's got to have an impact. It's got to make people sit up, take notice. And I think that today is truer than it's ever been. With just this volume of noise. And there was a stat I read the other day. Again, I'm rubbish on sources, so I don't know who said it. You'll just have to trust me. But it was 97% of advertising gets ignored. Actually, I heard it in a pitch. And the ad guy actually said he thought that percentage was higher. And that's a horrifying stat. 97% of ads go completely unnoticed and ignored. How hard is it to be part of the 3% that gets noticed? And that was always my approach. You want to do something disruptive that's going to stop someone scrolling, that's going to make someone talk to their friends about what they've seen or heard, that's going to make someone forward an Instagram post or a TikTok video. So when you're doing that, you can't just be producing mundane crap. It's got to be interesting. It doesn't have to be controversial, but it's got to tick a box that I guess, penetrates people's bullshit buffers so that they sit up and pay attention. So that does require disruptive thinking, and that is naturally going to be higher risk for a client. But the best clients and the best agencies work together to form a bond of trust where even if something doesn't work as well as you'd like, they've understood the process from the beginning.
So can any kind of brand be disruptive, Andrew? So, I can see FMCG brands, alcohol brands, that's easy. But what about, a drier B2B brand? Can they still be disruptive, but in their own way?
Of course, any brand can be disruptive. It's all about, not being disruptive for disruptive's sake. And like I said, disruptive doesn't necessarily mean controversial. Just means doing something in a different way. So if you're a B2B brand, I don't know, from the recruitment industry, the way I would think about it is, let's not necessarily behave like any other recruitment brand. Let's see if we can borrow some learnings from the fashion industry or the beauty industry. Like, how do they do their marketing? Could we, market our way in that way? Or what's everyone doing and how do we kind of zag in a different direction? You have to, and it's just about getting people's attention. And I think, doing the same as everyone else, is boring. Sometimes it's not realistic because other people have got much bigger budgets or they're much better known. So trying to do the same as them, but on a micro budget, is always going to be a lose. So you have to disrupt more so than ever, I think. But it's important, and it's important for brands to understand, what's our message, what do we want to get out, how can we communicate it in an interesting way. That's what I built my career on, really. I find it really depressing to just see communication for the sake of communication.
What this year then, 2024, how's the economy looking for the marketing and PR sector? Is it thriving or is it going to be crap?
I think there's definitely green shoots. It was a difficult year last year for a lot of agencies, broadly because of the macroeconomic environment. And without getting too sort of detailed about it, I think the biggest challenge for agencies have been maintaining margins, because there's been a cost of living, I use the word crisis, but the cost of living has increased, staff wages have inflated, fees haven't necessarily increased proportionately. Clients on the flip side have been nervous because of the economy, so they've procrastinated in terms of decision making. In some instances, they've cut budgets, made rash decisions. But I think, it's obviously sector specific, agency specific, but generally people had a decent sort of trading period at the end of last year. I think they're proceeding with cautious optimism to see how they're sort of coming out of that retail period, sales period, trading period over Christmas and New Year, and going into the new year. But generally it feels pretty buoyant. The agencies that are struggling are probably the ones that haven't managed their business as well as they should have and made difficult decisions earlier on in the process. If you're running an agency, you have to cut your cloth accordingly pretty quickly in terms of the level of fee income that you've got coming in. Some agencies just aren't strong enough in making those decisions at that pace required. But generally, I think this is going to be a really, really good year. I am an optimist, because I am not going to be apologetic about that. I think what we're going to see is sort of an increase in pace slowly for the next few months. As we get towards spring, summer, I think there's going to be a boom. And I can see it. The M&A market is quite a good indicator of it, because the private equity firms, the marketing services firms, they all know where they need to be by the end of the year. Last year was an okay year, but look, I'm not broadly experienced in M&A. I've been doing it for 3 years. So my first couple of years, wow, it was like I couldn't believe the pace that we were working at. And last year was just notably slower. It wasn't a disaster, but there was caution. There was buyers pulling out. There was buyers sort of knocking the price at the last minute, not for a deal because the macroeconomic environment had changed, so they were being more cautious. There were agencies that had had weak trading periods, so they pulled out of sales processes because they didn't want to sort of do it when they weren't performing as well as they would like. It was all happening at a low level, and there were still deals going on, but compared to the year before, where everything we sort of touched, we sold or bought, last year was slightly slower. Like, still a very, very good year. But I can already see the pace picking up. Lots and lots of agency groups wanting to make acquisitions, lots of agencies wanting to sell because they feel like they're at the right time and place. There's always going to be this need for building skills, building geographies. Scale, I think, is important for all agencies and groups. So it's been like, my start to the year has been 100 miles an hour, and long may it continue.
So where can people find more information about you, Andrew, if they want to get hold of you?
I'm a very easy man to find, unfortunately. They can go, I've got a website, andrewbloch.co.uk. I am still on X, formerly known as Twitter, not tweeting as much as I used to, at Andrew Bloch. I'm on LinkedIn, at Andrew Bloch. I'm on Instagram if you want a couple of holiday photos thrown in. And I'm on TikTok if you want to see how old and out of touch with youth culture I really am.
You've been on this show now. You get the general gist of it. If you were us, who would you interview next for this programme?
I really like people like Warren Johnson. I think is a great business person within the PR industry that really understands how to run a successful agency. I mean, I don't know who the specific people would be, but brands like Samsung, who work with lots and lots of agencies, I think would be interesting to understand how they manage their agency relationships. Half the agencies in London seem to have Samsung on their creds.
We'd love them.
Brands that do it well. If you ever wanted to talk to one of the Apprentice winners, something like that, they're always quite entertaining.
Thanks for your time, Andrew.
So I was quite keen to hear what Andrew had to say. He was a massive hitter in the kind of the PR industry agency side.
Yeah.
And now he's obviously shifted over to client side in some respects. But for me, the value in that episode was around how clients can run better briefs and run better pitches. And that is so important, isn't it? Because, I mean, what do you think? A third of our time is taken up spending on pitches.
Yeah, a lot of time spent on pitches. And a lot of the time, you know, he referenced the fact that sometimes agencies don't get the brief right, but also sometimes clients don't get the brief right. Like, I was going to use an example. We had a few technical issues with the virtual call-in. So when we were discussing it, it was glitching a bit. I would have given a few examples of situations we've had. But we had a brief not long back that was 12 pages long. Now, I don't know about you, but a brief, the word brief is supposed to be brief, and 12 pages.
And for a brief that was probably about 20 or 30,000 pounds in value. I mean, if it's £1 million brief, you'd expect 12 pages, wouldn't you? But
yeah.
For something, and that was the point Andrew made. And I think, remember the time we pitched for a very well-known household brand, and we got through the first meeting, and then we found out we were one of 12 agencies.
Yeah, and we walked away there, didn't we?
Who's got that time? Who's got that time to speak to 12 agencies?
There's people out there, and he said if there's people that have he's experienced agencies that 1 of 10. Well, we usually say more than 1 of 5, and it's not really worth our while because it's just not. You can't. How can you remember if you've met 6 or 7 different people? It's difficult. What I did like about it though. What I did like about when he was referencing being memorable, because obviously if you're client side, you know, you meet 5-6 agencies, it must be difficult to remember. But the boardroom with different things inside. I mean, we record the podcast from our boardroom.
We've ordered an ambulance for our boardroom. I didn't tell you.
And a beach.
Yeah,
he wanted
absolutely.
a beach. It's crazy.
But for me, no one's to blame. I think there's a tendency for agencies to blame clients for bad briefs, and probably clients blame agencies for missing the brief. But the takeout I got was there's an awful lot of time both parties need to put into the process if they want to get it right. And that is a commitment, isn't it? You know, you're looking at days and days and days of time.
I think just being a bit supportive of, if you're going to be working together for years and years, like we've got clients here that we've had 8-9 years, and the best ones are when they actually listen, take your advice. If you're paying an agency to work with you, you should listen. If you're paying them, listen to their advice. Some clients just want to use you as a supplier, and as he was saying, they're not the best relationships, are they? Where it's very transactional. Actually, I prefer relationships where you can say, actually, that's not going to work, and being honest with each other both ways. That's the best way to work, isn't it?
It becomes a little bit of a cliche sometimes when you say we're an extension of your team, but it's true. Those are the best possible relationships where you can have those honest conversations, but you can't force it, can you? You can't immediately get to that point. And I think that comes from trust. It comes from delivering great work. But I do believe that's something all clients should aspire to, and actually all agencies should aspire to as well.
Yeah, having a relationship between you. If you've got a good, strong relationship with the person that's leading the account, and maybe one of us, when we're working with a client, we try to keep we try to get involved in our client work. And I think that it's the relation. People are buying from people. But I do think, going back to the brief situation, because you went through what was the perfect brief, I do think that if you're getting 3, I would say is the best. You get 3. You'll handpick 3 agencies that you want to pitch. Don't handpick 10. Get 3, and then get them in. And if all 3 miss the brief, then the brief's the problem, right? Is that fair?
I think that's fair. And the other thing I found interesting was we default to a brief, don't we? We default to a pitch scenario, but there are actually alternatives like a live workshop or chemistry sessions, or
the tissue session.
Yeah. There's a load of alternatives, but agencies and clients tend to default to pitch scienarios every single time.
And I was listening to John Evans talking on his podcast last week, and he was saying when he's client side now, or he's been client side and he's been agency side, and he said he was running some agency training, right? And he said, just ask the client, what's the business problem? And he said, I used to give this training, and he said 9 out of 10 agencies would go, oh, we can't ask them what the business problem is. Like, because this is the brief, we meet the brief, we do the work, let's agree, and that, oh no, ask the question, why are we doing this? What's the problem? And he said, if you do that, you'll stand out. You'll stand out.
Otherwise, you're purely responding on a superficial basis.
Yeah, because his point was, the brief usually isn't the brief, which is weird, isn't it?
And I think a final point, I was fascinated to hear his pitch disaster story. So I would say, if you're a brand or a client listening to this, and you've had some sort of similar nightmare pitch scenarios where either you or the agency has done something horrific in the pitch, please get in touch and let us know, because we'd love to hear your stories.
I'm going to end on one little story. I was once another agency before working here, so check my LinkedIn for that. And we were pitching to a senior person. She's now a dame in the home office, and the CEO of the agency. I was just a lonely manager at the time. Finished his pitch. There was 9 of us in it from our side. Big agency, national pitch, and he went, and that concludes our presentation. Any questions? And the Home Office guy said, yeah, I'd just like to open with the fact that your campaign fundamentally lacks credibility. And it just went quiet, and I thought, I'm glad I'm not leading this question and answers. And guess what, right? We missed the brief, because we'd missed the brief on that. And instead of defending his position, this CEO took it fair, and he went, okay, we've clearly missed the brief here, but we are very good, and we'll show you. Give us another week. And we went off and went back and we won it, a big national thing. But those words are etched in my memory. Your campaign fundamentally lacks credibility. Anyway, thanks very much for listening to Socially Unacceptable.